How would a psychologist build your sales script? Today I'm going to be talking about selling, but from a psychological standpoint. Often what I'm seeing is people are taking a sales pitch, a sales approach, building a sales script, and ignoring the fundamental rules of psychology that all buyers have. So today I'm going to break those down and hopefully challenge a few concepts. So the first thing to always be aware of is someone's favorite subject is always the same. Regardless if you're selling finance software, you're in recruitment, you're selling energy, mobile phone contracts, whatever it may be, the person on the other end of the phone, the person reading that email, checking out that little bit of outreach that you've done, their favorite subject is always the same. Do you know what it is? It's always themselves. So given that, any approach that has a, let me tell you about us, here's our award-winning software, we're an award-winning marketing agency that help people, just park it, okay? Someone's favorite subject is always themselves. Whenever you start with you, what you do, what you can do for them, any mention of you, yourself, suddenly the phone is going to go down quite quickly. So that sets one rule in place. The perfect script has to be all about them. The second rule is when we reach out to someone for the first time, we have to understand which part of the brain we're dealing with. I like to call this part of the brain the inner gatekeeper. So picture the scene, you're walking down the street to your car at the end of a working day, and someone stops you and says, do you have time to talk about Blind Fox's charity? Immediately, the senses are going to kick in. You're looking for danger, you're looking for ways out, you're bored, you're not interested, all those types of things. The part of the brain then that I'm pitching to as a salesperson is that fight or flight mode. So I'm looking to detect threat, and I'm thinking about things because of that in their simplest form. So there's no point going into a sales interaction when you're pitching for the first time and delivering all the most complex, all the most jargon, all the most industry specific, all the numbers, all the bits of information that are only going to be interpreted by the intellectual part of someone's mind. Scripts, pitches, emails, whatever it may be, need to come across in their simplest form. A rule to live by with this is if you're in the UK, we would call it pub talk, maybe it's bar talk, maybe it's just talking to a friend in real life. If it would not pass the test in real life, it would not pass the test in selling. So what I mean by that is if I could go for a beer with a friend and tell them the pitch, they can't then look at me like an alien and not know what I'm talking about. How do I get it to its simplest form where it passes the pub test? Okay, so I've set the rules. So the pitch must be in its simplest form and it must be all about the other side. Now the last thing that I want us to be aware of when delivering this is how decisions are made. In terms of behavioral economics, how buying decisions are made, they're typically made with the emotional part of the brain, and then the rational brain kicks in after the fact, and that's when you get the buyer's remorse or the feeling that you've made a good decision. So the script then must feel like it speaks to the emotional part of the person. Same with your pictures, same with your emails, whatever it may be, something that you're putting across here has to be speaking to the emotional part of the brain. So typically how we're going to understand what it is that you do and how we're going to get into this is we're going to ask ourselves two very simple questions. Those are, number one, what problem does someone need to be experiencing to make it worthwhile having a conversation with you? The second part is how would they notice that problem existed on a day-to-day basis? Put very simply, this is going to be problem followed by the impact of said problem. So let's take a script format. So regardless of what pattern interrupt, what school of thought you're using, rather than here's all the features and advantages and benefits of what I do, I would challenge you to try this instead. So let's say you're a recruitment company, okay? what I'm going to go for instead of we're an award-winning recruitment agency who help mechanical and electrical contractors find their next star engineer. Instead, what I would say is I'm typically brought in by owners of ambitious M&E practices, but they're starting to struggle with a couple of things. One is it's really hard to find engineers. Not only is it hard to find them, but it's hard to find the ones that have got the right skill set. And then sometimes when they are in the business, because you don't have enough time to get them up to speed, often they're not really finding their feet and sometimes leaving. It might be those things, or you just hate dealing with recruitment consultants and you're looking for ways to not have to go through the same generic cycle of wrong CV, wrong type of applicant, wasted time on interviews. But look, I might be getting ahead of myself. This could be the part where you tell me you don't experience any of those problems. So I've taken something there that sits in a generic world, probably very saturated space, and rather than speaking to here's what we do, I'm speaking to here's what might be happening in your world that make it worthwhile us having a conversation. And I'm trying to get it in its simplest form. Now the other thing that I'm doing, and this is something that Chris Voss talks about in Never Split the Difference, is I'm actually going for no. Typical sales approaches are always going to be going for the yes. If I can get someone to say yes 19 times, typically the deal's closed. All that old smile and dial nonsense from the past. Instead, what I'm going for is room to say no. Pitches always work best when there's three things: room to say no, humour, and honesty. So room to say no is not going for yes, it's saying, look, those are the problems that I help with. You might tell me you don't experience any of them. I'm going for honesty. So honesty might be, here's what I help with, here's where we're great, here's where we're not. And humour. Often I'm putting in these pitches some sort of humour, maybe it's at the start of the call, but I'm throwing it in there just to keep things nice and light-hearted. Very hard to feel in danger when you're laughing at the same time. So that's how you build a typical script. And that piece there of taking those 2 to 3 big picture problems, you can put those out in a cold call. I could ring you up and say, I'm invited in to help people who have these problems. I could send it in an email. I'm sure you get millions of emails like this. I'm normally brought in by CEOs who are struggling with these 3 problems. You might not be struggling with any of them. If you are, let's talk. If not, please tell me to take you off the list and never speak to you again. I'm going for that yes, no response. Same could be said for LinkedIn messages, direct mail, whatever channel you're using. That is the premise. So let's go over the rules one final time. Number 1. The prospect's favourite subject is always themselves. So I'm always going to talk about them, not what we do. They don't care about what we do. You'll be amazed. Sometimes you don't need to mention your company name, who you are, anything that's rapport building. And an interesting piece of information that I found out the other day on this, just while we're here, if you work for the Samaritans, one of the rules with the Samaritans is you're not allowed to talk about yourself. You cannot talk about any stories, can't talk about any life experience, you cannot talk about yourself at all. But the goal of a Samaritan's call is to have the ultimate connection with someone, often to talk them down off the ledge. So why would the Samaritans do it if it wasn't true? The prospect's favourite subject is always themselves. The second part, how can I get my script in its simplest, most emotional part? If you read through your script or your pitch and you think, actually, this is not something I could say to someone in the pub without them looking at me like an alien, you should not be using it. And the third point, I just alluded to it a little bit there, is people make decisions using emotion. So how do I get someone onto that emotional path where actually we're looking for, can you think deeply about the problem I solve? Is there a clear, tangible emotion there? When there is that clear, tangible emotion, then there will be action. Ladies and gentlemen, that is how to build a pitch like a psychologist. Leave your questions in the comments. Let me know what else you want me to talk about.